All right, everyone, buckle up. Because today we are taking a deep dive into something a little close to home for SoCal drivers.
Common causes of car accidents.
I've got a stack of sources here. Legal guides, safety advice, accident reports.
Looking to get beyond the headlines.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's interesting, even though they come from these different angles, they all point to some pretty consistent themes.
Oh, really?
About what really ups the risk when you're out on the road.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So what's chapter 1 of this accident story?
What's the top culprit?
Yeah.
Well, it's probably not going to shock you. Speeding and aggressive driving consistently take the top spot.
Yeah, that makes sense on the surface, but I'm guessing there's more to it than just going fast is bad.
Right.
What are the nuances these sources are highlighting?
One thing that jumped out at me was how much emphasis they put on the fact that it's not just speed alone, but the combination aggressive behaviors that creates a truly dangerous cocktail. Things like tailgating, weaving in and out of traffic,
right?
Sudden lane changes.
Oh, yeah.
That's when things get exponentially riskier.
So it's like a double whammy of bad choices, each one compounding the danger of the other.
Absolutely.
Did any of the sources quantify just how risky this combo is?
One article cited a statistic that really drove this point home. Speed-related crashes make up almost 30% of fatal accidents in Southern California.
30%.
Let that sink in for a moment.
Yeah.
Nearly 1 in 3 fatal accidents involve speed as a factor.
Okay, that definitely makes it more than just a lecture from your parents. This is like a life or death issue.
Absolutely.
So speed and aggression, that's chapter 1 of our accident story. What comes next?
Chapter 2 is all about distraction.
Uh-oh.
And it probably won't surprise you to hear that mobile devices are the main villains here.
Yeah, no surprise there. I feel like every time I'm on the road, I'm dodging someone who's more focused on their phone screen than the actual road.
It's scary how commonplace it's become.
It is.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The sources go beyond the don't text and drive warnings and delve into the cognitive science.
Okay.
Behind why this is so dangerous, it turns out, even hands-free technology isn't a free pass when it comes to distractions.
Okay, that's intriguing. So it's not just about taking your eyes off the road. There's something deeper going on.
Exactly. The research these sources cite is clear. Our brains simply aren't wired for effective multitasking, especially when it comes to complex tasks like driving. Even when you're technically looking at the road, if part of your brain is engaged in a conversation or processing information from your phone, your reaction time and decision-making abilities are significantly impaired.
So even if you think you're good at multitasking, your brain is actually working against you in these situations.
That's exactly what the research suggests. It's almost as if our brains have a limited processing power. And when we try to split that power between multiple demanding tasks, something has to give.
Yeah.
And in the context of driving, those somethings can have dire consequences.
Okay, that's definitely food for thought. What kind of impact are we talking about here? Do the sources give any specifics on how much distractions actually affect our driving?
One source I came across cited a study that found visual distractions like looking at your phone.
Yeah.
Take your eyes off the road for an average of 4.6 seconds.
Wait, 4.6 seconds?
That might not sound like a lot, but think about it.
That's like a whole lifetime when you're hurtling down the freeway.
Right.
In that amount of time, you could cover a serious distance without even realizing what's happening around you.
That's precisely the point. These sources are driving home at 60 miles per hour. 4.6 seconds is enough time to travel the length of a football field.
Wow.
Completely blind.
Blind.
It's a sobering thought, right?
It is. Definitely makes you reconsider that quick glance at your phone. So we've got speed aggression.
Yep.
We've got distractions.
I think I know what dark cloud is rolling in next.
Oh, yeah.
Impaired driving.
You're right on track. And while everyone knows that drinking and driving is a recipe for disaster,
the sources go beyond just alcohol. They also call out fatigue, drowsiness, and even certain medications, both over-the-counter and prescription, as factors that can impair your ability to drive safely.
So it's not just about avoiding that extra glass of wine before hitting the road.
Right.
It's about being aware of any substance or state of mind that could mess with your focus and reaction time.
Precisely. It all comes back to that limited processing power we were talking about. Being tired or under the influence of certain medications essentially reduces your brain's bandwidth, making you even more susceptible to distractions and errors in judgment.
So it's like adding another layer of vulnerability on top of an already demanding task.
Absolutely.
Did any of the sources quantify just how risky driving while drowsy is?
One study cited in a safety guide compared driving while drowsy to driving with a blood alcohol concentration of 0.08.
Oh, wow.
The legal limit in most states.
Yeah.
Essentially, being overly tired behind the wheel can be just as dangerous as driving under the influence of alcohol.
I had no idea it was that serious.
Yeah.
I guess we often underestimate the impact of fatigue on our driving abilities. So we've covered the big three: speed, distraction, impairment.
Yeah.
What other factors do these sources point to as common causes of accidents?
Well, here in Southern California, we can't ignore the impact of weather and road conditions.
Of course.
Several sources specifically mention how our rainy season, with its sudden downpours and slick roads, creates a whole new set of hazards for drivers.
Yeah, that makes sense. Even experienced drivers can get caught off guard by how much rain can change the dynamics of the road.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding hydroplaning.
Right.
It's about understanding how rain affects visibility and, most importantly, tire traction. One source had a statistic that really jumped out at me. Wet pavement can reduce tire traction by up to 60%.
60%.
Yeah.
So even if you're driving at the speed limit and being super cautious, your tires suddenly have way less grip on the road.
That's the reality. And this reduced traction can significantly increase your braking distance and make it much harder to control your vehicle in emergency situations.
Okay, that's a scary thought. It's like the rules of the road suddenly change when the rain starts pouring.
Right.
So rain is a major factor. What other environmental hazards do the sources highlight?
Construction zones were another area that came up repeatedly.
Oh, yeah, of course.
The sources emphasize that these zones, with their constantly changing layouts, lane closures, and unexpected obstacles, require a heightened level of awareness and caution.
Yeah, it's easy to get complacent or frustrated when you're stuck in a construction zone. But it's important to remember that those workers are out there.
Absolutely.
In a very vulnerable position.
And it's not just about slowing down.
Right.
These sources stress the importance of being hyper-aware of your surroundings in construction zones. Workers and equipment may be moving in unpredictable ways.
Oh, yeah.
And there's often a lot of visual clutter that can distract drivers.
Yeah.
It's all about adjusting your driving style to match the increased risk level.
So we've covered the biggies minis, speed distractions, impairment, and the challenges of SoCal weather in construction zones. But I have a feeling there's more to this story, right?
Right, there's more.
Are there any less obvious accident causes that the sources dig into?
You're right. There's a whole other layer of risk factors that we haven't even touched on yet.
Okay.
And these are the ones that really made me rethink some of my own assumptions about driving safety.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's dive into those less obvious dangers in part 2 of our deep dive.
Welcome back. You know, it's funny. We often talk about accident prevention in terms of avoiding the big no-nos.
Right.
Don't speed, don't text, don't drink and drive. But these sources highlight a whole other category of risks that are less about what not to do
Okay.
and more about subtle choices and awareness shifts we can make behind the wheel.
Okay, I'm all ears. After that last segment,
Yeah.
I'm feeling like I need a crash course, no pun intended, in defensive driving 2.0.
Uh-huh.
Where do we even begin with these less obvious dangers?
Well, one that stood out to me was something we briefly touched on earlier, vehicle maintenance.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we tend to think car accident and immediately picture reckless driving or bad weather.
Right.
But these sources really emphasized that a well-maintained car is a much safer car, period.
That makes sense. I guess I'm guilty of taking for granted that my car will just work.
Right.
But like any complex machine, things can go wrong, and those malfunctions can increase the risk of accidents.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding a breakdown on the side of the road. The sources detail how things like worn tires, faulty brakes, or even a misaligned headlight can significantly impact your safety in ways we might not immediately consider.
Okay, you've got my attention. Break it down for me. How can something as seemingly minor as a headlight contribute to an accident?
Think about it. A properly functioning headlight is crucial for visibility, especially at night or in bad weather.
Right.
If one of your headlights is out or misaligned, you're essentially reducing your field of vision, making it harder to see potential hazards, pedestrians, or even the road itself. And if other drivers can't see you clearly, that increases the risk of them making dangerous maneuvers around you.
Oh, wow, I never thought about it that way. It's not just about being able to see, it's about being seen.
Precisely. And when you consider that many accidents happen at night or in low light conditions, the importance of properly functioning headlights becomes even more clear.
Okay, so regular maintenance is clearly crucial. What other, less obvious dangers did the sources highlight?
This one might surprise you. Even seemingly minor accidents like fender benders can have long-term consequences that extend far beyond a dented bumper.
You mentioned that earlier, and it definitely piqued my curiosity. I think we tend to dismiss fender benders as no big deal.
Right.
But you're saying there's more to the story.
The sources really emphasize that even low-speed impacts can result in injuries, particularly whiplash, that might not be immediately apparent.
Wow.
These injuries can develop over time and lead to chronic pain or mobility issues down the road.
That's a good reminder that any impact, no matter how minor it seems at the time, should be taken seriously.
Exactly. The human body is surprisingly vulnerable, and even seemingly small forces can have a ripple effect. It's always best to err on the side of caution and seek medical attention if you've been involved in any kind of collision,
Right.
even if you feel fine initially.
Okay, noted. So we've got car maintenance and the potential for hidden injuries from minor accidents. Anything else we should add to our mental checklist of less obvious accident risks?
One more thing that really stood out to me was the impact of road design and infrastructure on accident rates.
That's an interesting one. I think we often think of accidents as being solely the result of driver error. But you're saying that the roads themselves can contribute to dangerous situations.
Absolutely. These sources pointed out that things like poorly marked lanes, confusing intersections, inadequate lighting, or even unexpected changes in road surfaces can increase the risk of accidents, even for the most attentive drivers.
So it's not always just about the driver being at fault. Sometimes the environment itself creates conditions that make accidents more likely.
That's exactly what the sources are highlighting, and it makes you realize that being a defensive driver is not just about reacting to other cars, but also about being aware of potential road hazards and adjusting your driving accordingly.
Right.
For example, if you're approaching a poorly lit intersection or a stretch of road with faded lane markings, you might slow down and be extra vigilant to compensate for the increased risk.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about taking a holistic view of driving safety, considering both human behavior, AD, the environment we're operating in.
Exactly. It's like that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Speaking of prevention, let's shift gears and talk about what we can actually DO to avoid these common accident causes, both the obvious ones and those less obvious risks we just discussed.
Yeah.
I'm feeling like I need some actionable advice.
Well, luckily, these sources are chock full of practical tips and strategies for staying safe on the road.
Good.
And what's interesting is that a lot of it boils down to cultivating simple awareness and building good habits.
Okay.
It's not about becoming a race car driver.
Right.
It's about making small, consistent choices that add up to a big difference in your overall safety.
Okay. I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
So, where do we begin? Let's start with the big one, speeding. How do these sources suggest we keep our lead foot in check?
It sounds almost too simple, but the most effective strategy, according to these sources, is to be mindful of the speed limit and actively monitor your speedometer.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the flow of traffic, especially on highways, and before you know it, you're exceeding the limit without even realizing it.
Oh, I'm definitely guilty of that. It's like you get into a zone and suddenly you're going 80 when the limit is 65.
Right.
But it's not just about knowing the number.
Right.
It's about adjusting your speed to the conditions.
You nailed it. These sources really emphasize that driving conditions play a huge role in determining a safe speed.
Right.
If it's raining foggy or there's heavy traffic, you need to slow down, even if it means going below the posted speed limit.
Yeah.
Your speedometer is a guide, not an absolute.
Right. Safety over speed, always. And I guess that leads into another important point, anticipating potential hazards.
Exactly. Being a defensive driver means constantly scanning the road ahead, looking for potential problems, stopped vehicles, pedestrians changing traffic patterns, even that plastic bag tumbling across the lanes.
Oh, yeah.
It's about developing that heightened awareness and being prepared to react smoothly and safely to whatever comes your way.
It's almost like having a sixth sense, right? Being able to anticipate what might happen before it actually does.
That's a great way to put it. It's about cultivating that proactive mindset rather than just reacting to what's right in front of you.
Okay, that makes sense for speeding.
Yeah.
But what about distractions? How do we combat the urge to check our phones or fiddle with the radio while driving? I feel like that's the hardest one to resist in our hyper-connected world.
It's definitely a challenge, but the first step is acknowledging that our phones are incredibly powerful distractions.
Yeah.
These sources offer a simple but effective solution. Put your phone out of reach. Glove compartment, backseat purse, even the trunk if you need to go cold turkey.
Out of sight, out of mind. Wow.
Exactly. And if you're using your phone for navigation, make sure it's securely mounted and the route is programmed before you start driving.
Right.
No more fiddling with addresses or searching for podcasts at a red light.
Those are good practical tips. But what about those times when you absolutely need to take a call or respond to a message? Life doesn't always pause just because we're behind the wheel.
You're right, and these sources are very clear on this. If you must use your phone,
Yeah.
pull over to a safe location, full stop. It's never worth risking your safety or the safety of others just to respond to a text or answer a call.
Right.
And you know what? Most things can wait.
Okay, that's fair. Safety first.
Right.
Now, what about impaired driving? Beyond the obvious advice of not drinking and driving, what else can we do to make sure we're in a safe state to drive?
When it comes to fatigue, the sources emphasize the importance of getting enough sleep before driving,
Yeah.
especially for long trips. And it's not just about the total hours of sleep. It's about the quality of that sleep. Are you waking up feeling refreshed or groggy? That's a good indicator of whether you're in a safe state to drive.
That's a good point. We often focus on how many hours we sleep, but how we feel when we wake up is just as important.
Exactly. And these sources also recommend taking breaks every couple of hours to stretch your legs, get some fresh air, and stay alert.
Oh, yeah.
Even a quick 15-minute stop can make a big difference in your focus and reaction time.
Yeah, that's something I've always heard. Stopping for a quick walk or cup of coffee can really make a difference on a long drive. Keeps you from getting too zoned out.
It definitely does. And if you start to feel drowsy while driving, the absolute best thing to do is pull over to a safe location and either take a short nap or simply rest until you feel more alert.
Right.
It's not worth pushing through drowsiness. It's just as dangerous as driving under the influence.
Okay, good advice. Now, what about medications? How do we know if a medication might impair our driving? I feel like that's something people don't always think about.
That's a crucial point, and the sources were clear on this. Always discuss potential side effects with your doctor or pharmacist.
Okay.
They can tell you if a medication has the potential to cause drowsiness, dizziness, or impair your reaction time.
So it's all about communication and being informed. Don't be afraid to ask questions and advocate for your own safety.
Exactly. Knowledge is power when it comes to making responsible choices about driving.
All right, let's move on to weather and road conditions. We talked about how rain can make things especially dangerous here in Southern California. What do the sources recommend for navigating those slippery roads?
The key is to slow down and increase your following distance. Remember that statistic about reduced tire traction on wet pavement?
Yes, 60%.
You need to give yourself extra time and space to react. The sources also recommend avoiding sudden braking or sharp turns, as these can easily lead to skids.
Okay, those are good reminders. And I guess it's not just about rain, right? We have to adjust our driving for any kind of adverse weather.
Yeah. You got it. Fog, snow,
Yeah.
even strong winds. All of these conditions require specific adjustments to your driving style.
Right.
If it's foggy, use your low beams and be extra cautious about visibility if there's snow or ice. Consider postponing your trip altogether if possible, or invest in tire chains for better traction, and always check the weather forecast before you head out.
So it's all about adapting to the conditions and making smart decisions based on what Mother Nature throws at you.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about construction zones. Those could be real hazards, even for the most experienced drivers.
Right.
What do the sources suggest for navigating those areas safely?
First and foremost, pay close attention to signs and signals. Construction zones often have reduced speed limits, lane closures, and unexpected detours. So it's crucial to be aware of those changes and follow directions carefully.
Right.
They also recommend being extra cautious of workers and equipment in the area, as they may be moving in unpredictable ways.
That's a good reminder to be extra vigilant in those areas. It's easy to get distracted by the flashing lights and cones. But we have to remember that there are people working there, and their safety is just as important as ours.
Absolutely. It's all about sharing the road responsibly and understanding that construction zones are dynamic environments with constantly changing risks.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Speeding, distracted, driving, the hidden dangers of fatigue and medications, weather conditions, construction zones, and even the importance of being extra vigilant after those seemingly minor fender benders. Before we wrap up this segment, is there anything else that stands out to you as a key takeaway for avoiding accidents?
There's one overarching theme that I think ties all of this together: personal responsibility. All of these sources, regardless of their specific focus, emphasize that ultimately we are responsible for our actions behind the wheel.
That's a powerful point. It's not about blaming external factors or making excuses. It's about acknowledging that we have the power to make set of choices every time we get behind the wheel.
Exactly, and that sense of responsibility is what will ultimately lead to safer roads for everyone.
All right, well, I'm feeling much more informed and empowered to hit the road now. But before we go, I know we have one more segment coming up. What can our listener expect?
We're going to circle back to a point we made earlier and dive a little deeper into the often overlooked connection between accidents and our own internal state, our emotions, our stress levels, even our overall well-being.
Okay.
It's a fascinating exploration of how our inner world can impact our actions behind the wheel.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Let's take a quick pause, and then we'll come back to uncover those hidden links between our minds and our driving habits. Stay tuned. All right, we are back for the final leg of our deep dive into the common causes of car accidents. And as promised, we're going to explore a topic that might surprise you.
The link between our internal state and our driving behavior.
Okay, this is definitely not something I've considered before.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
What kind of connections did the sources make between our inner world and our actions behind the wheel?
One thing that came up repeatedly was the impact of stress and anxiety on driving performance. The sources explain that when we're feeling stressed, our bodies go into a fight or flight mode, releasing hormones that can make us more reactive, impulsive, and even aggressive.
That makes sense when I'm feeling stressed. I definitely notice that I'm more irritable and impatient in general, and I guess that could easily translate to my driving behavior.
Exactly. And the sources pointed out that this stress-induced reactivity can lead to all sorts of risky driving behaviors like tailgating, speeding, or making sudden lane changes. Essentially, our ability to make calm, rational decisions behind the wheel is compromised when we're in a heightened state of stress.
So it's almost like stress hijacks our brains, making us less aware of potential dangers and more likely to make impulsive choices.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just about acute stress, like being late for a meeting or stuck in traffic. Chronic stress, the kind that lingers over time, can also have a detrimental impact on our driving abilities.
So even if we don't feel acutely stressed in the moment, that underlying baseline of stress could still be affecting our driving without us even realizing it.
That's precisely what the sources suggest, and it makes you realize that taking care of our mental and emotional well-being is not just important for our overall health, but also for our safety on the road.
Okay, that's a powerful connection. So stress is a major player.
Yeah.
What other internal factors did the sources highlight?
Another interesting area was the impact of emotions, both positive and negative, on driving behavior. We tend to think of road rage as the main emotional culprit, but these sources went beyond anger, exploring how a wide range of emotions can influence our choices behind the wheel.
So it's not just about avoiding anger, it's about being aware of how A and Y, strong emotion, even something like excitement or sadness, could potentially affect our driving.
Precisely, for example, if you're feeling really excited or happy, you might be less focused on the road and more prone to distractions, or if you're feeling sad or down, you might be less alert and reactive to potential hazards.
That's a good reminder that driving requires our full attention and focus, regardless of what's going on in our emotional world. It's almost like we need to create a mental bubble around ourselves when we get behind the wheel, shielding ourselves from those intense emotions that could compromise our safety.
That's a great analogy. It's about creating that mental space where we can be fully present and engaged with the task of driving, even if our inner world is a bit turbulent at the moment.
Okay, so we've got stress, we've got emotions. Are there any other internal factors that the sources link to accident risks?
One more that really stood out to me was the impact of fatigue. Not just the kind that comes from lack of sleep, but the kind that arises from overall physical and mental exhaustion. The sources explain that when we're pushing ourselves too hard, whether it's from work, family obligations, or even just the constant demands of modern life, our bodies and minds can become depleted, leaving us with less energy and focus to devote to driving safely.
I think we can all relate to that feeling of being burnt out, and it makes sense that this state of depletion could spill over into our driving habits.
Exactly, and it's not just about feeling tired, it's about that overall sense of being overwhelmed and depleted, which can impair our judgment reaction time and even our ability to stay calm under pressure.
So it's a reminder that self-care isn't just about bubble baths and face masks. It's also about creating boundaries and prioritizing rest so that we have the mental and physical resources to navigate demanding tasks like driving safely and effectively.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that our capacity for safe driving is directly linked to our overall well-being.
All right, so we've explored a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of accident prevention, the connection between our internal state and our behavior behind the wheel. Before we wrap up this deep dive, is there anything else that you want to highlight from these sources?
There's one overarching message that I think resonates throughout all of these sources. Safe driving is a holistic endeavor. It's not just about following the rules of the road or avoiding distractions. It's about cultivating awareness both of our surroundings and of our own internal state. It's about recognizing that every time we get behind the wheel, we're bringing our whole selves into that experience, and that includes our emotions, our stress levels, and our overall well-being.
That's such a powerful takeaway. It's a reminder that safe driving is not just a skill. It's a practice, a constant process of checking in with ourselves, making conscious choices, and prioritizing safety over speed or convenience.
Well said. It's about bringing mindfulness and intention to every aspect of our driving experience.
Oh, that's a lot to think about, and I definitely feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on what it means to be a safe and responsible driver. Thanks for walking us through all this great information.
You got it anytime.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll leave you with this next time you get behind the wheel. Take a moment to check in with yourself. How are you feeling? Are you stressed, tired, overwhelmed? And then adjust your driving accordingly. Maybe that means taking a few deep breaths, slowing down, or even pulling over for a break. Remember, safe driving starts with self-awareness. Drive safely out there.
Until next time.
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.